Namaste, all of you. We'll proceed to the next session, which continues the topic of pranayam. We have been considering this for last couple of sessions. Last time I told you that for pranayam, it is important to really get introduced to the breath aspect. The breath aspect within us is such a marvelous entity, particularly in spiritual realm. Now, usually, it has been thought that spirituality is something of only the mind and consciousness. Uh, it is only mental act, intellectual act, emotional act, psychic act. The mind needs to be pure. The mind needs to be cultured, etc., etc. Well, there is no doubt about it. The mind is such an important factor. That is why the scriptures have said, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. The mind is the agency which is so instrumental for both the conditions for life, the condition of bondage and condition of freedom. But of course, in Oriental approach and in Indian philosophy, the mind has been explored to great extent, far beyond what the psychology does. As I've been telling you, psychology deals, or psychological mind is just the tip of the iceberg. And common man's idea of mind means psychological mind. We don't see any mind beyond psychological mind. Uh, but in philosophy, mind has been explored to its complete depth. It is interesting to note that in various subjects of the lore or various vidyas, we don't have Manasa Vidya as such. There are so many vidyas, you have heard about some 64 vidyas, uh, but there is no Manasa Vidya in our thought process, Indian thought process. It is because the mind is matter to be investigated, to be examined, to be understood, to be construed, to be conceived, to be comprehended by philosophy, philosophical processes. So the mind comes in each of Indian philosophy, whether it is orthodox or heterodox, whether it is Vedic or Avedic philosophy. The mind is subject matter of philosophy. Now, one may have a question as to why the mind should go become subject matter of darshanik system, philosophical system. It is because what is the source of mind? The source of mind is in cosmic matter. The source of mind is not subconscious mind, because subconscious is again mind. There should be some source for that subconscious mind as well. So the mind comes from cosmic matter, metaphysical matter, and therefore mind was left for philosophy to investigate, for philosophy to examine, for philosophy to explain, for philosophy to articulate. That is why every philosophical system has psychology as its subject. Now, this word is inappropriate to call it psychology. Mind has ocean depth. Mind has dimensions of space with the universe. And therefore, uh, the mind should be having a science called mindology rather than psychology, because psychology has something to do with the brain function, brain process, brain chemistry, uh, and therefore psychology is not the right word. So maybe the word should be mindology. Anyway, uh, now this mind, when it goes towards cosmic planes and metaphysical planes, it is related to breath, in the sense precisely related to prana. In metaphysics of Vedanta Shastra, Upanishads, and even in one of the Adhikarans of Brahma Sutras, uh, the prana is described to be a companion of Mahat Tattva, Buddhi Tattva, the cosmic intelligence. That's the first mutation from Prakriti. So the primordial matter has first mutation of the nature of Buddhi, which is Mahat, which is intelligence principle or intelligent principle. And it is, the prana is of that generation. However, the buddhi has generations from it. There is a progeny from Mahat. From Mahat comes Ahankar. From Ahankar comes, there are three Ahankars. One Bhutadi Ahankar. The other Ahankar uh, turns out senses, mind, human mind, the mind of the living beings, intelligence of human beings, human psyche, etc. So, next principle after Mahat is Ahankar. From Ahankar come Pancha Tanmatras and then Pancha Mahabhutas on one hand. On the other hand, from Ahankar comes psychosensory system, psychomental system, consciousness system. So, the prana doesn't have any generation, but from Mahat you get next 22 principles. There are 24 principles in Sankhya. The 24th is the Mula Prakriti, primordial matter. Then the 23rd is Buddhi. 22nd is Ahankar. And then remaining all the 22 come out of Ahankara Tattva. And therefore, the prana and the intelligence principle are of one generation. They are twins, they are brothers. After Mula Prakriti gives birth to Mahat. Now, this prana is so important principle which creates a classification in creation in the form of animate, inanimate, living, non-living. What makes the creation living? The signature condition is that there is prana in all living creation, howsoever tiny to howsoever large. The entire living creation is characterized by prana in it. The prana, that's why it is called pranic srushti. So, the prana means the breathing process. That is another signature condition of all living creation. All living creation will breathe. You will not find a living creation not breathing. That part of creation which is animate, which is living, which has life, the invariable concomitant is that there is breathing in it. They breathe in and they breathe out. They have inhalations, they have exhalations. So that is how the in breath and out breath is signature condition of uh, any pranic creation or creation which has prana invested into it, infused into it, which is living. Now, this breathing therefore gets equated to prana. We think that this very breathing itself is prana. We are taking in prana with a very in breath. This is what is popular notion. However, we must not have any confusion and we must have clarity between the breath breathing on one side and prana on the other side. Now let's consider the most characteristic aspect whereby we will be finding distinction between the two and we will be able to conclude that breathing is not pran, the breath is not pran. What is that condition? With regards to breath and breathing, like the moment living creation takes the birth, the first thing it starts is that it starts breathing. It is characterized by the breathing act. Any living creation is characterized by breathing act which starts right from the first moment of its taking birth. And all the living creations ultimately at some point in time die. There is no living creation which is deathless. So there is no living creation which is birthless and deathless. There must be birth to any living creation. So understand this living creation we will find in even vegetable world, uh, botanical world, to human beings, creatures, insects, birds, animals, etc. etc. So the act that is there throughout their living from birth to death is that the breath is going on, breathing is going on. But with regards to breath, the condition is that in case the living creation is dead, we say there is no more breathing. Breath has stopped. Breathing has stopped. So that is the expression, that is the description, predication, or the verb that the breathing has stopped. So breathing has commenced and breathing has stopped are the two conditions in relation to all living creation. But with respect to prana, that is not the case. It is not said that the prana has stopped. The description is prana is gone. So prana comes and prana goes. Prana comes and prana goes. With regards to breath, the breathing happens and breathing ends. So there is end to breathing, which is the point of death for the entire living creation. The breathing ends. But with regards to breath, prana, that is not the case. The prana doesn't end. Prana goes. So prana is again an eternal kind of thing. And therefore, on the point of death for any living creation, the prana leaves. And there is nothing like prana stops or prana ends. Like the case of breathing, breathing stops and breathing ends. So life will always begin with in breath and life will always end with an out breath. This is a rule, law, without any exception. All life will commence with in breath and all life will end with out breath. But with regards to prana, the prana has only one condition, that the prana goes and on the point of death. So with the description, we understand that there is definitely a difference between prana and breath. So as I said during the last session, yet there is a lot of association, inseparable relationship between breath and prana. So much so because that we tend to take them as one and the same. The breath is the vehicle of prana. The breath is the vehicle of prana within the embodiment. Now, with regards to respiratory breathing, we say the breathing is done or breathing should be done. Breathing is happening. So this is how the description of the breath will be there. That the breathing is done, breathing should be done, or breathing happens and breathing is happening. Now try to understand the entity of the breath in the light of these expressions. So this is what happens when the breath is just a respiratory breath. The breathing happens and breathing should be done, or breathing will happen. But in yoga, it has been identified that the breath is an enormous entity, enormous agency. It is fabulous agency. It is multitasking agency. It has n number of manifestations, n number of functions. It has only functions in yoga. And in our philosophy, there is no adhyatmic process without yoga. Whether it is karma marga or a jnana marga or a bhakti marga or a dhyana marga, there is yoga. Ultimately, those paths culminate when the recourse is taken to yoga. So, Jnana Marga, one should be adhering and adopting to Jnana Yoga for it to fructify by bestowing samam bonam. Similarly, Karma Marga. Karma Marga must ultimately become Karma Yoga for it to fructify. Bhakti Marga. Bhakti Marga has to ultimately fructify in Bhakti Yoga. So also case of Dhyana Marga, Dhyana Yoga. So all these seemingly different paths ultimately come to some unified condition by embracing yoga. Yoga comes everywhere there. And therefore, in the Vedic culture, Vedic philosophy, Vedic conduct of life, the breath has that position which is used as an internal agency. In Adhyatma Marga, whether that is Jnana, Dhyana, Karma, Bhakti, there is something Adhyatma internally done. Yoga is always an internal act. It is an internal phenomenon. It's an internal happening. it happens inside. It must happen inside. And therefore, the breath and the breathing is a unique principle in all Adhyatmic pursuits, what you call a spiritual pursuit. It is an inadequate and improper word to call Adhyatma as spirituality or Paramartha as spirituality. So it is proper to stick to words such as Paramartha and Adhyatma. So in Paramartha and Adhyatma, the breathing process is so important. When the mind has to work in internal realm, the breath is such an important agency that it must collaborate with. If the mind doesn't collaborate with breath and breathing, it cannot work internally. It cannot work for yoga, be that karma marga, jnana marga, dhyana marga, bhakti marga. The mind, when it has to work in the internal realm, it has to take collaboration of the breath and breathing and later prana. So when the mind has to work internally, it has to take recourse, it has to embrace, it has to take assistance, it has to have dependence, it must subserve or get subserved by the breath and breathing. That is why yoga, which we are considering here, is something to be done internally. Now, what is the agency to work internally? The breath-mind combinations. The breath-mind combination is only the combination whereby one can work in the internal realm, in the Adhyatmic realm, in Paramarthic realm. The Paramartha takes place within. Adhyatma takes place within. And the only instrument that comes handy is the breath and mind combination. Now let's try to understand one psychological dimension here. Usually our mind works with what? There are underlying tendencies and therefore mind functions in a particular way. Mind has its functions, mind has its roles, mind has its schemes given by the tendency body. Vasana is the force which works behind the mind. And then the mind works because of stimulants coming from outside, the stimulation from outside in the form of Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. The moment you have these 5 stimulations, the mind is triggered, mind is activated. Despite the stimulation, you can't have a condition that the mind is not stimulated, mind is not activated. So one is extraneous force with which the mind works, which is external stimuli. By way of Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, the 5 sensory objects of the nature of Shabda, sound, Sparsha, touch, Rupa, form, color, shape, dimensions, Rasa, the taste, and Gandha, the smell, the odor, the fragrance. So the mind will start functioning because of these 5 stimulants. These are external to us, these are extraneous things, external things to us, and from there the mind is activated. The other one is mind is activated from within by our subconscious mind, by our vasanas, by our tendencies. So usually in business activity of our life, the mind which is functioning is vasanic mind. It is vasanic mind. It is vasana infested mind. It is vasana driven mind. It is vasana impelled mind. It is vasana propelled mind. And then it has additional forces, extraneous, external, such as Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. That is why the mind is business activity of life in Vitthana will work that way. Now imagine if the mind has to work internally, if the mind has to work in Adhyatma, mind has to work in Paramartha, for yoga, and it has to work internally. Our vasana is formidable alien. Is that right? There should be no doubt about it. There is no second opinion about it. It will be unanimously accepted that our vasanas play havoc when we want to work internally in Adhyatma, internally in Paramartha. So those are major aliens when one wants to have a spiritual, so-called spiritual pursuit, which I have been calling as Adhyatmic pursuit or Paramarthic pursuit or Yogic pursuit or Apavarga in the language of Patanjali. Apavargarthata. If we want to work in the realm of Bhoga, then the vasanic mind will work. The mind which works in the internal realm is pranic mind. It is pranic mind. The pranic mind, the mind is offshoot of intelligence. It is coming from intelligence, buddhi tattva, intelligent principle. Is that right? The mind is coming from intelligent principle, buddhi tattva, mahat tattva. So in its earlier generation, the same mind is called buddhi tattva. If you go to origin of mind, the first generation of mind, it is buddhi tattva. And as the Vedanta puts it, Mahat Tattva or Buddhi Tattva and Prana are of one generation. They are brothers. They are brothers. Prana has no progeny, but Buddhi has progeny. And therefore, now understand the relationship between Prana and Pranik Mana. In Adhyatma, we need that sublime mind to work rather than tainted mind, dented mind working. We want the transparent mind, pure mind, virgin mind to work. If the virginity of the mind is compromised with, then our internal journey is obstructed, impeded, or it is pushed out to come to Vyuthana. Now, understand and experience this interesting aspect. You can also experience now. I'm giving you the precept, I'm giving the theorem. The theorem in yoga is that the fag end of very, 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 very deep exhalation touches the pranic mind. The pranic mind is virgin mind. The pranic mind is pure mind. So now you can try, as in whatever position you are, just try to exhale more and more and more and more and more. To be exhaling more and more and more, there is a process. You slightly inhale and again try to exhale. Nominally inhale and again try to exhale. See what condition will come in your mind. That exhalation will touch the pranic mind. It will land on pranic mind. And that is why there is emphasis on prolonged exhalations, deep exhalations in yoga. The prana is mind here. About breathing, if you recall, I said breathing is done. Breathing has to be done. We do the breathing. All animate things do the breathing. But in the internal realm, the breath is driven. In pranayam, the breath is driven. Breath is not done. So once you get the taste of the practicality of pranayam, you will know that in pranayam, the breathing, the breath is driven. In our worldly life, mundane life, dynamics of life, the breathing is done. That's why we say take an inhalation, do an inhalation, or make an exhalation, or do an exhalation. Now, this is what you see in quackery today. All pranayams which have got divorced from classical approach. There is invariable instruction in pranayam that you must do the inhalation. You must do the exhalation. Inhalation has to be done. Exhalation has to be done. Has to be customized and done. So you take the inhalation and you do the exhalation. So understand the verbs. How in breathing the verbs are used. And similarly, in quackery of pranayam, because of no touch of classical approach, usually the verbs used are you must do a slow inhalation, you must do a deep inhalation, you must do a deep exhalation, you must do a slow exhalation and deep exhalation. It's all doing and doing and doing. See, this doing is all ahankarika karma and it is alien to Adhyatma. It is alien to Adhyatma. So in pranayam, the thing is that the breath is driven. The breath has to be driven. Now, if the breath has to be driven, like if the vehicle has to be driven, you must learn the driving of vehicle. Not learning to drive the vehicle, you can't be driving the vehicle. Is that right? You must learn driving. Therefore, you must learn driving of breath. And the best field for it is asana. Why asanas are there in the scheme of yoga is the more kind of the core factor, essential factor is that you learn to drive the breath. You are given a field and you are given a kind of assistance to learn the driving of the breath, how to drive the breath. So a deep inhalation is not done in pranayam. A deep inhalation is driven in pranayam. A deep exhalation is not done in pranayam. Deep exhalation is driven in pranayam. Because you will see that it seeps into the body. It is moved into the body like vehicle moves on a terrain. The breath moves in the body matter. Now if you decide to exhale, a slow, soft exhalation, you will see that the breath is driven from brain parts, top of the brain parts. You slowly come down to face, come down to throat, go down to chest, go down to diaphragm, go down to abdomen, go down to navel, go down to pelvis, pelvic floor. Now this is drive. So you will be driving in various locations of the body. In pranayam, the breath is driven. Breath is not done. Inhalation similarly can come from bottom region of the trunk to top region of the trunk. So the breath is driven in various locations. That is why Patanjali mentions in his definition that aspect and that factor, Desha Paridrushta. In a region, particular region, the breath is driven. Breath is mobilized. Breath is moved. So the breath has a movement in the body. The breath has movement in the body matter. Breath has movement in the mind matter. The breath traverses, breath moves, and breath seeps. The breath will seep in your body matter, breath will seep in your mind matter. So seepage is also flow. Like water seeps in the ground, that means the water travels from surface of the ground to some internal layers of the ground. Water seeps means water travels from surface to episurface to internal planes of the earth. So the verb to be used in pranayam precisely is you have to drive the breath. Drive the breath in abdominal location, drive the breath in thoracic location, drive the breath in back location, drive the breath in head location. So the breath needs to be driven in pranayam. Now you don't have to drive your breath in your external activity. You do the breathing. If you are climbing up the mountain, climbing down the mountain, climbing up the stairs, climbing down the stairs, you do the breathing. You don't drive the breathing. Imagine when you are doing hill climbing and when you are coming to the peak point of it and you know how you are breathing, heavily breathing, etc. You take a sharper inhalation, you make a sharper exhalation, etc. You don't drive the breath, you do the breath. In business activity of life, we are doing the breath. Even while I am talking, this is a business activity of my life now. I am not in Adhyatma. I am not in Paramartha. I am trying to talk to you. When I am talking to you, I am doing the breathing. It is only by doing the breathing I can be doing this act of talking to you. So, in Vyuthana, the breath is done. In Adhyatma, in Apavarga, in the internal act, the breath is driven. So I understand how the breath is totally differently described when it is working in internal realm of yoga, internal dynamics of yoga, internal dynamics of yoga, internal D-dynamics of yoga. So that's how asanas are wonderful field for you to learn the various drives. So try to understand how will you drive the breath in a asanic position where we are very familiar. You are not learning a new posture as such. You have learned that position well. You are able to be in that position well. You are able to negotiate the position well. You are able to stay in that position well. The breath is driven. Breath has to be driven. It's not the breath has to be done. That's a raw condition. That's a rudimentary condition. It is not a condition of an asana. It's a rudimentary and raw condition, unprepared condition. So once when you are doing asana in that maturity, proficiency and maturity, the breath will be driven. And you will learn to drive the breath. You are taught to drive the breath in asanas for different various conditions, for different negotiations. So in asanas we will be negotiating different conditions. So sometimes we are having torpidity or dullness, inertia. We want to overcome negative conditions. So we negotiate an asana to overcome the negative condition and enter the zone of positive condition. We enter the zone of positive condition. So we perhaps commenced with inertia, dullness, torpidity, but then we negotiated in a way that we entered the zone of active condition or rajasic condition or tamasic condition. So that's why we enter the different zones. That means we are traversing some distance from tamasic zone to rajasic zone and then to sattvic zone. These are the scheme of asanas mentioned. So from tamasic zone you have to go to sattvic also, the breath is driven, not done. And asanas give you a wonderful field for the breath to be really driven. And you have to learn the breath driving in asanas. First, learn the posture, become familiar with the posture, then learn to drive the breath in your asanas for different conditions, exalted conditions. So, in the internal realm, understand the breath works in a collaboration with the mind, and they become two sides of the same coin. For worldly activity, it is not the case. That our worldly condition, our mind, we don't find necessarily the breath on the other side of it. But in Adhyatma, in Paramartha, in Yoga, we will come across this, the fact that the breath and mind are two sides of the same coin. So it's a different breathing in pranayama. So that should be enough for this lesson, where we were trying to distinguish between the breathing of animate system and the breathing in pranayama of a yogi, or in adhyatma, in paramartha. So, how the breath can touch the pranic manas and come out of the grips of vasanic mind. So I will just give you a last example. When you are in satsanga, when the mind is sanctified, purified, sublimated, what happens to your passion? What happens to your subconscious tendencies? They are almost put to sleep. They are almost put to sleep, and that's why you feel sublime, you feel transcendent. So the breath works similarly for the entire vasanic body. The vasanic body is put to a latent condition. It is given that sleep, or it is sanctified and purified. The breath is internal purified. In a shrine, if prasad sanctifies you, in the internal adhyatmic paramarthic realm, the breath sanctifies all the organs of body, organs of mind, organs of psyche. Next time, we'll try to delineate on this little more. Namaste.